Hello and welcome to Heavy Metal Rex. My name is Wace, and today finally, as you can see next to me, you probably saw the thumbnail, I finally have the ability to drive another SPT WRX, thanks to somebody from the community. It's been a long hunt for one. You guys probably remember when I went up to Chicago, I actually drove Chris Austin's GT that was modded, which was really cool, but unfortunately it was snowing, so we couldn't really do a whole lot. And before that, if you actually remember 2 years ago, we did do a video between Jordan's WRX, which is manual, and his friend's WRX, which was, I believe, a base model with an SPT. Unfortunately, I don't know where that guy went, so it's taken me that long to get one of these cars. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because you guys probably saw Subaru Japan did release another STI model, the S210, which unfortunately it is a CVT, but that aside, what's interesting is they did decide to up the power. Now, when Cobb put out the tuning for the SPT, people look back at the old 2015 to 2021 WRX, which really wasn't a great performer when it came to modding. Most of those cars actually ended up popping pretty low in the torque level. Those CVTs were not very strong. Now this, of course, is obviously a different model CVT than the old one, and it has some extra logic to make it better to drive, you know, with the simulated gears and, you know, just the shifting that it does. So it's really interesting because that S210 makes about 330 or 340 torque, which is about where most tuners were actually tuning the Stage 1, Stage 2 cars now with Cobb. So I figured it's worth going back and talking about that again, because I think a lot of people that tend to get these automatics, sometimes they look at the manual community and maybe get a little buyer's remorse because they want to mod their car and they feel like they can't. Subaru has just proven to us that you most definitely can mod that car. So there's a couple of other things I want to talk about, because this engine and transmission are actually shared now that Subaru's on the global platform with the WRX. A lot of the other cars actually share this transmission, and it's pretty interesting what they can do. Now, the interesting thing about this transmission and this engine is, we all know, Subaru did move over to the global platform with the WRX. Now, that means it does share some similarities with the Outback and the Crosstrek, and even to some extent, the Legacy. The very first car to actually have the FA24 and a variation of this particular transmission was actually the Ascent, and I believe that was back in 2019. And that is actually, if you go back and look, I think it was Prime Motoring that did pull the FA24 out of a 2019 Ascent and put it in that Crosstrek, where they ended up making about 550 horsepower over like 60 passes, which was really cool. And before then, we didn't really have much of an experience on how this was going to perform in a WRX. Now, the difference in those cars, and even and I don't think it is with the WRXs, but if you look at the Ascent and the Outback, they obviously do run the FA24, but they run 260 horsepower and 277 pound-foot of torque, which is a little different than what we have, because we're at 271 and 268. Another car that, so we've got this in the Ascent, we have this in the Outback XT and the Wilderness, and then the Legacy. Now, but what's really interesting is when I went and you guys will probably correct me on this, when I went searching for the different part numbers for the transmission to see which one had just a high torque CVT versus a SPT, is what they call this, Subaru Performance transmission. The WRX has the SPT, which is the TR69. The Ascent had the TR69. The Outback XT had the TR58, but the Wilderness has the TR69, and the Legacy has the TR58. Now, I don't know what the differences are between the TR58 and the TR69. This is something I definitely want to research a little bit more, but if you guys know what it is, definitely put it down in the comments below. But this particular, the WRX does have the TR69, which is their SPT. Now, it does come with a lot of other features along with it, you know, with the Sport Sharp mode, and you can adjust the different dampenings and stuff like that. Actually, you know what, I'm sorry. The GT does the dampening, but here you can adjust the throttle response and how the transmission behaves. Now, the modding is a part I really want to talk about, because as you guys know on my channel, I mod my car, and I want people who have this automatic to also feel like that they have an option. Now, we've seen, well, about a year ago, where there's tons of SPT cars being modified with one of my friends, Doug, down in Texas. I believe his SPT was one of the first ones that Cobb did modify. And he was making, I want to say, about 320-ish horsepower and about 350 to 360 torque. Tuners were probably limiting that to under 350 as much as they can, because if you go back and look at the VA transmission, that's kind of what people were, is kind of where they were braking. So I guess they took that as a caution. Now, what's really interesting is in the past, we would have just regular automatics, you know, 5-speed automatic, 4-speed automatic. And you know, you have actual gears in here. And if you haven't actually driven this particular car or any one of the other FA24 cars, the transmission does simulate more of the gear. So it does actually go up in revs, shift, you know, have like an actual shift point, go back down and do all that stuff, which is, it's interesting. Yes, some people do consider that it's fake gears, but at this point, it's better than the alternative, which is, most of you guys know, most CVTs back in the day will just peg all the way to maximum RPM and just sit there and whine like crazy. Now, when we did that race between the automatic and the manual, it was a Jordan had a premium WRX and our other friend had a base. And there's about a 100-pound difference in it. But if you go back, and I'll put that video here because it's very interesting. When we raced, it really depended on which speed that we started at that determined how well that race was going to go. For the most part, it's fair to say the manual was ahead each time. We proved that. But if you were starting at 20, the gap was much, much shorter versus when we started at 60, where the gap went to about a car and a half or 2 cars up or to however fast we ended up going. And that is really interesting because if you go back and look at the quarter-mile times of a 6-speed base WRX, it is about 13.9. And then you go look at the CVT, it is about, I think, 14.1. Now, 0.2 seconds, even in somebody who's driving manual, the only way you're going to get that is obviously perfection. In my mind, they're essentially the same speed. And but that's from a dig, because the CVT can actually do what is considered a type of launch control. It does have the capabilities, whereas obviously in the manual, we don't have that capability. I don't know if that's something that we can try, but at least we can show you that it's present. But what I want to do now is I actually want to go and look at some of the settings that are on the actual infotainment system for the transmission. So this is the big difference that you have between the automatic and the manual. Is the manual, there's no settings that you can change. If you've driven any number of STIs in the last 20 years, you know that they have SI drive mode, which is Subaru's intelligent drive mode. And basically it gives you the ability to change different parameters. Now in the STI, the biggest things that you will notice is the throttle response. And that kind of helps people have either a heavier foot or a lighter foot. If they know they're in intelligent mode, they know that it's more fuel economy, versus if they're in sport sharp, then now this is where I'm going to hit the gas. Now, when people got their STIs modified, tuners would then use the SI drive mode to be able to allow people to adjust their tunes, which I'm not sure that's something that you can actually do with the SPT now. But what you can do is you can still go through and change any settings you want. Obviously, you have comfort, normal, sport, sport sharp, and you can switch to individual and then set any number of things that you want. Now, when I was in Chicago, we did kind of mess around with the suspension a little bit, and then also the power, what they call the power unit, which is the throttle response. Sport sharp means, you know, it's more put your foot down, it goes. Where intelligent, I think most of the power comes on at around like 50-ish% of the throttle, and then, you know, it does adjust how quickly the transmission will actually shift. Now, of course, the automatic does come with the Eyesight system. There is a whole separate section that we can mess around with the Eyesight, but we're actually not going to worry about that today. That's actually a video I've been meaning to make for other reasons, because now the manual is also coming with the Eyesight, and a lot of people have some hesitations about that. But when I was in, I can't remember if it was in Florida, when the TR came out, they did have the Eyesight on it. Bucky did actually drive straight into a barrier, and the car did stop. So if the Eyesight system didn't work, that would have ended very differently. But at the same time, they were also using that TR on the autocross track, and not once did the Eyesight actually stop them from driving the car as hard as they wanted to. Obviously, you are able to turn off all those features, so it's not that big of a hindrance. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go, in a little bit, we're actually going to go driving, and I want to try and find, there's a street down here. We'll just go up and down the street and see if we can actually notice the difference between the comfort, normal, and sport. But the more important thing that I want to focus on is the power unit here, as we're actually going to get on the highway, and I want to see if I can actually pay attention to the gear shifting, because we do have paddle shifters in here as well. You can also shift with you can put the stick in the manual mode. You can shift that way, or you can just let it shift however it wants. So I'm really looking forward to trying that out. You know, right now we're just going to leave everything in, you know, in normal or whatever, then we can mess with it as we go along. Thank you, Rebecca, for letting me use your car for this. This is Rebecca. This is her car. She's so nice to let us mess around with it for the day. Before we hop on the highway and actually talk about how the car is working, I wanted to we're not going to launch it, but I just want to see if we could actually do the track mode. So basically right now I have everything in Sport Plus on the console. I've got the car in track mode, so basically now what I need to do is I need to put my foot on the brake and hold the revs down, and yeah, it does exactly that. So it's holding at 2,000 RPM, so if I let go, it'll then launch the car. So I guess that's kind of cool, something that the regular car is just not going to have access to, which is kind of cool. But I don't know that many people that are actually launching their SPT, their WRX, and they probably are. If you bought a WRX, especially if you modded it, you're probably going to use launch control. And I know we now have launch control through Cobb, and I've used it a few times, but it's my transmission has been through a lot. I don't understand this topic. Unfortunately, I'm actually recording this in post, and I want to apologize because I didn't realize that the GoPro camera mount that I had on the windshield was starting to go loose. Obviously, I couldn't hear it or check it, and I couldn't hear it in the car until I started editing this video. So I'm going to do my best to try and minimize it, but I apologize in advance. Highway right now. The car is currently set in comfort mode. Everything is in comfort, and it's a pretty chill drive. If I didn't know I was in a WRX, if somebody didn't tell me, I would have no idea. But I mean, I think that's the idea of the comfort mode, is if you're just driving everyday stuff, you should just have a say a comfortable drive. What we're gonna do here is, as long as I can make it, what's really interesting, what I actually didn't notice until now, is there's actually a heads-up display that shoots, was it hazard signs on the windshield, which is really crazy because that's not something that you normally see in a Subaru, especially because we all know they don't really like to spend money on cool stuff like that. So what we're going to do now is we're actually just going to get on the straight, and so right now the car is shifting on its own. You can't change any gears unless you actually put it into manual mode, which we're going to do once we get into sport mode or whatever. So even right now I'm just going 50 miles per hour, foot down, and okay, so at least it catches up pretty quick. But like a regular automatic, you're going to have to wait for the revs to actually get up to where they need to get to, and then it's going to do what it needs to do. So I want to actually hear it shift at least once. So if I wonder if it would actually do that, because that's really interesting. It didn't really, the revs went up to 4,000, but they didn't actually move a whole lot. So I wonder if that's part of its comfort mode. Is that something that you've noticed as well, where it doesn't really shift a whole lot? Can you get it to shift when you're in comfort mode much?
It's more so Sport and Sport Plus.
More in
where
Sport.
You can really hear it.
Okay. So now we're just gonna go straight to Sport Plus, because I mean I guess we can try normal. So it doesn't change. So you have Intelligent, Sport, and Sport Shop. So that was with it Intelligent. So we're just gonna put it into Sport. And what's really interesting is you hear the engine note change right away as soon as you put it into Sport. So again, we're only going about 50, 55. So okay, so now the interesting, and I can actually see it's actually going to shift. The biggest difference there was the revs went from, it was 2,000 RPM, it jumped up to 45 instantly, versus before it didn't actually do that. Here I can actually change the gears on my own now. So I do have the access to the paddle shifters. I can actually downshift technically. This was really interesting because I'm comparing this to what it would be if it was in a manual car. Normally at 60 I am cruising at 25 RPM, which is exactly where we're at here. I actually want to go back and look at what the gear ratios are the simulated gear ratios are in the SPT versus the manual, because in the manual the gear ratios are very close to an STI versus the old WRX. The old WRX gears were much longer. So here, even though everybody's I'm driving the speed limit, and everybody's still on my butt, which is just such a normal Missouri thing. If I'm going 60, normally when I want to go ahead and lane change, or if I want to overtake somebody, I will usually go down to fourth. But the difference here is you don't really have to do that. So if I put my foot down at 60 in a manual car in sixth gear, obviously I'm going to be lugging the engine. But here, it is actually going to go ahead and put it in the appropriate gear. In this case, it was third gear. And that's pretty normal. I would normally put it in fourth gear. That would put the RPMs at around about 3,500. Here, it switched it to third, and put the RPMs at about 45, which is, that's for speed, that's where you want to be. But then once I was done, it actually put it back into 6th gear and reverted the RPMs back to 3,500, which is so interesting. But they don't move the RPMs as quickly as this did. I was not expecting that. And if I go back to just intelligent, the same thing. If I'm driving 6 miles per hour, it's at 2,000 RPM, which actually is much lower than the ratio that we would get in a manual. So if I put my foot down, there's a good amount of time before it kicks in. And again, it kind of hovers at the 4,000 to 5,000. Doesn't really want to go past that, which is interesting. Now, if you're, wow, okay, there's 7. Oh my goodness, there's 8 simulated gears. Holy crap! I thought that it was 6 this whole time. So if you didn't know that, this is, now I know I keep saying gears. There's no real gears. It is a CVT. Now, I actually do have a CVT chain at work, which I should actually get a picture of and show you guys. It's not a belt like the old traditional CVTs are, which is why everybody tends to hear a weird whine, and it just has a rubber bandy feeling. That's what everybody says with a CVT, and that's true. And there's a Forester to my left that's driving that has a regular traditional CVT like that. It's not great, but it's older technology. But here with that chain, it's a very thick chain, and that chain it's doing a lot of work. But that's one of the reasons why you're able to get a little bit more torque, and presumably why this transmission is able to shift so quickly. It's able to move very quickly between the 2 cones and get you up to speed. Now, when it comes to the whole CVT whine, I have not heard any noise out of this transmission this entire time we've been driving, even when I'm putting my foot down, that you would normally hear. So it sounds like a proper automatic, which is good. Now, have you heard anything, like any whines or any weird noises coming out of the transmission? Nothing at all. I mean, these are actual. So the things I'm talking about, these are actual complaints that people have said for reasons why they wouldn't buy a WRX with an SPT. But just driving through here, this actually feels like surprisingly good here. We're actually going to get off on one of these roads here and just get the RPMs a little bit higher and the gears a little bit lower. I want to go through maybe like the simulated 2nd and 3rd and kind of see how that feels and compare it to my experience in my WRX, because where I live, generally those are the gears that I'm in, that's the speed I'm in. Maybe like between 30 to 40 miles per hour, you can really feel that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna shift with the paddle shifters and see what that feels like. All right, so I am actually using the paddle shifters to get it into 2nd anytime I come down. So this is a great fun little road. Yeah, just regular shifting like I expected to do. Really quick. I mean, it truly does not feel like a CVT at all. And I've driven a lot of, people on the channel for some reason think that I love CVTs and I love like electronic cars. I don't. I appreciate technology and what it can do for people, even if it's not for me. I don't just outright dismiss things, you know. But this, when I drove Chris's car in Chicago, I already was like, okay, there's something special about this. It's not a regular car, but we couldn't really push it. But even though we're not, I'm not on the track here, I can still I can still go around and feel like the difference. Like it does feel really good. Right now with the car, the power unit in Sport Plus mode, it does have the suspension in Sport as well. Feels pretty much like my WRX. Like I still have OEM suspension on my car. It still feels like we're going through these turns.
All right, so we're back from our drive, and I gotta say, it actually was a lot more surprising to me this time around since the last time I drove this car. Before you judge this transmission, and you're on the fence and you don't know which one you want to buy, or maybe you've driven manual for most of your life and you just don't want to do it anymore, or there are instances where maybe you can't drive a manual and you're not sure if the Subaru performance transmission is good enough. I'll tell you right now, it's actually really damn good. Engineering Explained actually did this video a long time ago, and I completely agreed with everything he said in that video. It is a CVT, but it is really retuned in a way that really makes it feel like a regular transmission. And I felt that just driving through, even if we were on, you know, like highway speeds, you put it in Sport Plus mode, it goes, right? It is immediate. There's no delay, there's no weird noises, there's nothing, you know. Then we took it out on the little twisty road over there, and we did that a few times, and that was really fun too. You know, even if I wasn't shifting manually, you know, between second and, you know, simulated second and third, it really felt like I was, you know, driving in a regular automatic car. I did not know that this thing had 8 simulated gears, which is crazy. But then when you're in comfort mode, when you want it to just be chill, it is exactly that. It's just a chill everyday car, which is how I drive. Most of, I'd say maybe 80% of my driving on a daily basis is me just taking my kid to school, and that's just regular traffic, regular driving, no floor in the car. And it was nice that it just does that. And then when it comes to the modding, I think that there is still a place for this transmission in our lineup. So all the guys, you know, that really you think that automatic shouldn't even exist, I don't think that's fair. I've always said that, whether this was a good transmission or not, it's still not fair for them to say an automatic shouldn't exist, because not everybody has the ability to drive. I mean, hell, give me 5 more years and both my knees are already starting to feel like shit. So who knows, maybe in future times I may not be able to drive a manual. But if for some reason you think you have some sort of buyer's remorse because you bought an automatic transmission WRX, or you have a GT, or even the guys up in Japan who have the S210 with the SPT, it is not bad. And that's where we're gonna leave it. It's great for what it is. It doesn't hinder the car whatsoever. You wanna put on some light modifications. Subaru has proven you can do that. If it's good enough for Subaru, it's good enough for us. And yes, if you have the ability to drive a manual, obviously you're gonna find a little bit more fun of that, but you're not gonna lose fun just because you get an automatic. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully it's informative, especially for those of you who are, again, on the fence. So really, you owe it to yourself before you make a decision based on somebody on the internet, even myself, go drive it. Once you drive it, I think you'll feel completely different. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one.